Hey guys, this next video is to help you do the lesson, or not the lesson, the assignment that I made for you guys. It's called The Road to Imperialism. The Road to Imperialism. Now, again, this is a review of what you've already learned in Edgenuity about the Spanish-American War. So I've already done the review video for the Road to War. I've also done the video for fighting the war, and now I'm going to do the video for after the war. After the war, when there was this question in the USA about whether or not we become an imperial power. And we're going to go over what that means later. Now, I'm going to be writing on the whiteboard the words that you are going to need for the fill in the blanks. I'm going to be doing it in the order of which the fill in the blanks on the assignment are. So it's very important that you pay attention to this and that you take notes. On the assignment, the fill in the blank words are going to be in alphabetical order, not sequential order. This video, I'm doing it in sequential order. So you need to watch this video. Otherwise, it's going to be hard for you to do that assignment. It's going to take you like 3 times as long. All right? Okay. So now let's talk about what happened when the Spanish-American War ended. Now, as I forgot the date, the last video. I knew it started in the spring of 1898, but I forgot the exact date. The Spanish-American War began on April 25th, 1898, okay? April 25th, 1898. So it was a quick war. It lasted only a few months. By August 12th, the Spaniards were at the White House asking President McKinley of the USA for a peace agreement, peace terms. This was done officially in October of 1898. So in October of 1898, representatives of the USA and Spain. Remember, if I wrote these down, they're going to be your word choices. Fill in the blanks with. So, representatives of the USA and Spain met in Paris, France, to draft a formal peace treaty. Now, conspicuously missing from this were representatives from Cuba. So the whole reason that the USA fought Spain was to give Cuba its independence. And as I mentioned to you at the end of the last video, Cuba was not invited into the peace treaty negotiations. The door was like slammed in their noses, which is kind of ironic because this is supposed to be all about them and their freedom. So negotiations lasted until December. So October, November, to 3 months of negotiations, all right? So Spain gave up Cuba, which you should obviously know by now, but Spain gave up Cuba to give Cuba its independence, but they also gave up Puerto Rico, or as Americans say, Puerto Rico. They gave Puerto Rico to the USA. So there was never any even acting like Puerto Rico was going to get their independence. Supposedly Cuba was going to get its independence. Puerto Rico was like, no, it was changing hands. Spain gave it to the USA. And they agreed, Spain agreed to give the USA the Philippines as well. To give the USA the Philippines. Remember, they're called the Philippines because there's more than one Philippine island. There are many, many islands in the Philippines. It's a large group of islands in Southeast Asia and the South Pacific, and the Philippine Islands, or the Philippines. So they agreed to sell the Philippines for $20 million. Now, let's find out how much $20 million is in today's dollars. If you ever want to figure out how much something costs adjusted by inflation, you go to Google, like I'm doing now. You type in inflation calculator, all right? You go to this website. It's called West Egg, the West Egg website. Can you see it? Is it too bright? All right. So we're going to put in the amount of money, $20 million. $20 million. Now, put in the initial year, 1898, and then the final year is this year, or last year, actually. All right, so what cost $20 million in 1898 today would cost, wait, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6, wait, 1, 2, 3, wait, I gotta write this down, sorry. 6, 2, 1, 9, 2, 0, 9, 2, 4. All right, so $621 million, 920,294. So 924. We need Miss Ivanek here. Okay, 621,920,924. So 20 million in 1898, $20 million is the equivalent of 621 million today. All right. Now, next one, US troops. US troops stayed in Cuba. So Cuba got its independence, but US troops stayed in Cuba. They remained there. They did not leave. It's not as if they gave Cuba their independence and then they left. No, they stayed there. So Cuba was living under military occupation of the USA. All right. They stayed in Cuba to help set up a government and to write a Cuban constitution. Now, as you know, my family is Cuban. As I said in the first video, actually. They did write a constitution, but constitutions, like we've had one constitution since 1776 or 1789, actually. Cuba has had more than one constitution since it's got its independence. I know that there are some countries that go through many constitutions. We've only had one. So, like my family believes that the best constitution that Cuba ever had was the Constitution of 1940. So the Constitution of 1902 or 1903, whenever it was first drafted, was revised, and the Cuban Constitution of 1940 is what most Cubans that live in the USA today think was the best constitution. All right, not the one under Fidel Castro, which is a whole different story, you know, but that's what Cubans here in the USA believe, the exiles. All right, so now let's go to the Teller Amendment. All right, so we're going back to before the war. Now, before the war, there was the Teller, it's gonna be one of the words, Teller Amendment. These amendments are named after people. So this is probably a man whose last name is Teller. But anyway, I do know what the Teller Amendment was. I don't know who the man was, but the Teller Amendment, it was before the war. So it was like in the spring of 1898. It said the USA would not annex Cuba. The USA would not annex Cuba. So remember, annex, a larger country makes a smaller country become a part of it. You're annexed. All right, so they promised that in the Teller Amendment they wouldn't annex Cuba, but after the war, there was a little kind of catch. The US officials forced Cuba to add the Platt Amendment. Platt, P-L-A-T-T, named after a man whose last name is Platt. The Platt Amendment, P-L-A-T-T. So, the Platt Amendment had a stipulation. The Platt Amendment limited Cuba's ability to make treaties with other nations. And the USA had the right, under the Platt Amendment, to intervene. Intervene. What does intervene mean? I'll give you an example of intervene. You get into a fight at school, there's a bigger guy who's beating the crap out of you, and I, as a teacher, or Dr. J, or you know, Dr. Harvey, one of us, we get in between you two boys and we intervene and we stop the fight from happening. I say two boys because there are no girls enrolled in this class right now. So that's intervening. You guys are fighting and we intervene. Okay, we stopped the fight. So it gave the USA permission to intervene in Cuba's international affairs. All right. It also allowed US military bases on Cuban soil. And this is something that is a very American thing, having our bases on other people's land. You're going to notice that we do not have Cuban military bases on the USA or Spanish military bases on our soil, or German military bases, or Japanese military bases, or South Korean military bases. But we've got military bases in other countries. So I remember when I lived in Italy, I remember I was driving in northern Italy with one of my friends, and he commented on a U.S. military base, and he didn't like it. He was like, "Ugh, damn U.S. military base." And I kind of saw it from his point of view. He's an Italian living in Italy. Why should there be a U.S. military base on his land? I can see his point of view. We have military bases in Germany. We have military bases in South Korea. Normally, it's in countries where we fought a war on their behalf or we defeated them. So, for example, Germany and Italy, we defeated them in World War II. We have bases there. South Korea, we helped them in their civil war against North Korea, and we have a military base in South Korea, etc. Okay, so the U.S. has a military base in Cuba, and the name of this military base is Guantanamo, Guantanamo. Guantanamo base. The American slang for this base is called Gitmo. American soldiers called Guantanamo base Gitmo. So, U.S. forces withdrew in 1901, but they left the base of Guantanamo, which is in the eastern part of the island, the far eastern end. And Cubans don't like this. They don't want the base in Guantanamo Bay, but it's something that's been left over since 1898 or since 1901. Okay, so Cuba became independent. It wasn't really that independent. Republic. So it went from being a colony of Spain to an independent republic. What is a republic? Again, a republic is a form of government in which the people vote for their leaders and they vote for their representatives. And it's a government by the people for the people. Okay, so now the truth is that it really wasn't a very independent republic. The USA exerted a lot of power over Cuba. And a lot of Cubans were fine with this because they saw the United States as a benevolent, that means like a good neighbor who would protect them, and they didn't really have much of an issue with it. Other Cubans were much more nationalistic, and they were like, get these Americans out of here. This is our country. They're behaving like an imperial power. And one thing that a lot of Americans who haven't traveled or who haven't traveled in Latin America or who aren't Latin American don't know that in a lot of Latin America, there's a lot of animosity, that means bad feelings, against the USA because they consider the USA to be an imperial power that's always sticking their nose in other people's business. So we've intervened in Latin American political affairs. We intervened in Guatemala, for example. We intervened in Chile. There was a socialist president who was elected there in 1972, and the US military basically worked together with the right-wing military leader Pinochet, and they overthrew the Allende, that was the name of the president, the socialist president. They overthrew the Allende government, and then you had the Pinochet dictatorship for many years after. So I've met Chileans who have a lot of animosity towards the USA because they feel like they suffered this right-wing dictatorship when they had elected the socialist, and they blame the USA for that kind of intervention. And this is one story of many. All over Latin America, in every country, you will meet Latin Americans who think the USA is kind of like this big brother that kind of hovers over Latin America and intervenes in their affairs. Okay, so, and here's an example of why. Cuba, all right. The Platt Amendment, I just gave you the example. All right, so now, giving the USA right to intervene. It was written down on paper. It's not even something you can debate. It's on paper. The USA has the right to intervene. Okay, so now let's go over to the Philippines. All right, so let's look again where in the world we are here. Okay, hold on. All right, can you see the map? All right, so in the middle, you can see there's Cuba. Cuba and Puerto Rico, they're in the Caribbean, just south of the USA. You can see to the east, there's Spain. There's Spain over in Europe. Go that way, this way. This way we have Asia. We have Asia, and there are the Philippine Islands, the Philippines, and the island of Guam in the South Pacific. Look how big the Pacific Ocean is. Oops. Crossing the Pacific Ocean. That's how far away the USA was from the Philippines. Okay, so now we're in the Philippines. Where am I? Where's my stuff? Oh, here it is. Okay, sorry. We're in the Philippines. All right. Filipinos. This is not a vocabulary word. I'm just writing it down so you can learn it. Filipinos. So somebody from the Philippines is called Filipino. Filipino. Okay, so if you're from the Philippines, you are Filipino. I remember our classmate DeAndre told us, remember, he told room 402, that his grandma was from the Philippines. That means his grandmother is Filipino, okay? All right, so the Filipinos, the people of the Philippines, felt betrayed by the USA because they thought the USA would give them their freedom. He thought the USA would give them their freedom. Now, when the treaty, and they didn't, and when the Treaty of Paris, remember, when you have a treaty, it's named after the city where it was. So for example, the treaty that ended World War I was called the Versailles Treaty because it was signed in Versailles. This is the Treaty of Paris because it was signed in Paris. So when the Treaty of Paris made the US, made the Philippines a US possession. So what is a possession? A possession is something that you possess. What is something that you possess? Something that you own. So the US basically owned the Philippines, okay? And the Filipinos were super not happy about this because they had allied with Admiral Dewey, thinking that the USA would give them their freedom if they fought with the Americans against Spain. And they fought with the Americans against Spain, and they were good allies to the Americans. And then we kind of double-crossed them at the end, and we didn't give them their independence. We didn't give them their freedom. We made them a possession of ours. So after this, the Filipinos went from being allies of ours to enemies of ours. So what are allies? Allies are people that fight with you in a common cause, usually in a war. A friend is another way of saying it. Okay, so they went from being our friends to our foes, from our allies to our enemies. All right, so that war, the Filipino War, the Philippine-American War, which is different from the Spanish-American War. The Philippine-American War lasted 3 years. The Spanish-American War lasted 4 months. 4 months. So, what does that tell you? Which war was harder to win? And not only which war was harder to win, which was the unforeseen war. In other words, we got into the Philippine-American War because we got into the Spanish-American War. So the Spanish-American War was a result of, the Philippine-American War was a result of the Spanish-American War. So we wouldn't have even gotten into the Philippine-American War if we had given the Philippines their independence after the Spanish-American War was over. So that was a completely unnecessary war. All we had to do was give them their independence, and this war never would have happened. We didn't give them their independence, and what happened? We got into a 3-year war over a war that originally, the first war, the Spanish-American War, lasted 4 months. So many more Americans died in the Philippine-American War than died in the Spanish-American War. Okay. So it took the USA 3 years to gain control of the islands. It cost more lives than the Spanish-American War cost. And finally, in 1916, the Philippines were granted self-rule. Self-rule. That means that they were able to rule themselves. The American military men were out of there, and they didn't have American soldiers patrolling the streets and Americans all over the place, basically. But they were still a U.S. possession until 1946. Until 1946. So after the Spanish-American War, the Philippines was a possession of the United States for 48 years. For 48 years. Okay, so now the last part of this is no more fill in the blanks. It's to help you with the second part of the assignment. So the second part of the assignment is about the imperialism debate. The imperialism debate. So when this war was over, there was a big debate in the USA about whether or not we should become an imperial power. Americans saw what the result of the war was, that we went into this war supposedly to give Cuba their freedom, and instead what we did was we got Puerto Rico as a part of our Commonwealth, and we got the Philippines and Guam as a possession of ours, and we weren't giving Cuba total independence because we were kind of meddling in their affairs and intervening. So people were like, what do we fight this war for? I thought it was to free Cuba, and look at all this extra stuff we were getting. You know what I mean? So the imperialism debate. So let's talk about the two parts of the imperialism debate, okay? One is pro-annexation. Pro-annexation. So remember, imperialism means one country controlling many other countries, ruling over many other countries. That's imperialism. Or if not really ruling, having a lot of influence on them and intervening and meddling with them. So pro-annexation, that was one side of the debate. There were two sides of this debate. This was one side of the debate. Pro-annexation. So I'm going to give you the two reasons for pro-annexation, okay? One, and these, you're going to have to write these reasons down. It's no fill in the blanks, so you need to copy this down in your notebook, okay? One pro-annexation argument was trade, wealth, and power. Trade, wealth, and power. So the people who were pro-annexation wanted us to annex places like the Philippines, Cuba, and Puerto Rico because we could use their natural resources. We can force them to trade with us because if we own them, they don't have any choice. They got to trade with us. And it'll give us more power and prestige around the world. Hey, look at the USA. They own all these countries. So power and prestige around the world. We're this big, strong power. And then money, trade, and wealth that you get from the natural resources of these countries. For example, Cuba, the Philippines, Puerto Rico, these are all tropical islands where you can grow sugarcane and the sugar industry and grow coffee beans and sell coffee and things like this. Okay, now another one is to educate, civilize, and Christianize. Now remember, we are talking about 1898, and the United States was a much more racist country back then than it is now. So it was perfectly politically correct back then. Today you could never do it. It was politically correct to write in the newspapers that it was our job as a white Christian country, as an Anglo-Saxon Protestant Christian country, to civilize lower cultures. So Americans saw, for example, the Philippines as being like this kind of tropical island with savages on it who, you know, they weren't white and they weren't as civilized as Americans were because Americans came from English culture. And so we should go over there, we should educate them, we should civilize them, and we should Christianize them. We should make them become Christians. Now, the thing that's stupid to me about this is that the Philippines is an extremely Christian country. I've traveled to many countries in my life, and I visited the Philippines, and I'm telling you, I've never seen a more Catholic country than the Philippines. Remember, Catholicism is the world's largest Christian religion, and it's an incredibly Catholic country because they were a Spanish colony for so long, and the Spanish are Catholics. So this was a stupid idea to Christianize them. They were already Christian for the most part. Okay, so that's the pro-annexation debate. So you need to write down these two reasons. Reason number one, trade, wealth, and power. Reason number two, to educate, civilize, and Christianize them. Okay, next one, anti-annexation, to be against it. Remember, annexation, you're making a smaller country part of a larger country. Anti-annexation, one of the reasons that people were against it was that it violates human rights. Violates human rights. So what are human rights? One of them, there are many human rights, but let's just talk about the one that's most important for this. The right to be free, the right for self-determination. Self-determination means you can make determinations for yourself as a people. So people have a right not to be ruled by other people against their own will. It should be something that they agree to. And so that violates human rights. Okay, there's a man named William Jennings Bryan. He's very famous, great thinker. And he said, it is not necessary to own people to trade with them. So he basically threw this argument into the garbage. And he said, we don't have to own these people to trade with them. How about we become friends with them? How about we give them incentives to trade with us other than owning them? William Jennings Bryan made a very good case, right? Okay, and then the other one is the idea of empire. It violates the American ideals of self-government. So this is an American ideal. The whole idea of self-government. It is the very reason that we broke away from the British Empire. We wanted to govern ourselves. We did not want to be governed by a king over in England. We wanted to govern ourselves. This is the very reason why we broke away from England. So is it a little hypocritical of us? Hypocritical is like when you say one thing and do another. It's hypocritical of us to say that we're this country that believes in self-government and government by the people for the people. In the Declaration of Independence, for example, it violates the whole concept of the government, the Declaration of Independence. And I'm going to tell you, there was one a senator, his name was Senator Hoare. Hoare spelled H-O-A-R, okay? Senator Hoare, H-O-A-R. I don't want any giggling here. Okay, his name was Senator, what was his name? George Hoare. I'm trying to think of his first name. His last name is very memorable. That's why I remember it. So Senator George Hoare said that it went against the Declaration of Independence. He basically showed the Declaration of Independence, the wording in there, and it said, when people are not happy with their form of government, it is their right to overthrow that government. That's what our very own Declaration of Independence says. So how can we do to the Filipino people what England did to us? They have the right to overthrow us. That's what Senator Hoare said. All right. So those were two of the people that were against the war. William Jennings Bryan and George Hoare. All right, next one. Last thing. So another thing is the whole slippery slope argument. The slippery slope argument is that if this happens, something else is going to happen. So people were saying who were anti-annexation, first the Philippines, what's next? China? Are we going to be on a stepping stone, like, you know, from Philippines to China, and we're going to start, you know, being an imperial power in China now? So the U.S. gaining the Philippines as a possession put the USA on the same level as other imperial powers in Asia. So in Asia, we were competing against Britain, Germany, Russia, and Japan for power and influence on China and on Asia. So last thing, 2,000 Americans died in these two wars, 2,000. Most of them died from yellow fever and other tropical diseases. So the irony of these wars is that the people that died didn't really die. I mean, there are people that died in battle, but the great majority of them died because of diseases when they were on the war front, okay? And the last thing I'm gonna show you is a phrase that you see a lot in Latin America, and really I've seen it in Europe when I've been traveling in Europe. It's graffiti. And I've seen this, Yankee, go home. Now, before I started to travel, I never knew that the USA, that people in different countries had this idea of the USA. So the very first time I saw it, I was in Europe, and I asked my Italian friend, Yankee go home, why is that on the wall? What does that mean? And he said, well, you guys, you Americans are everywhere. You've got military bases all over the world. You influence us in many ways. Your products are all over the place. They opened up a McDonald's in Piazza di Spagna in Rome, in the middle of the most beautiful part of the city. People didn't like that. They look at the fast food and the just all aspects of American culture, American movies, American TV. We're very, very powerful around the world culturally, and we're very powerful militarily. And we've intervened in the affairs of other countries. So, rightly or wrongly, I'm not giving an opinion about it. I'm just stating a fact. This sentiment of Yankee go home, I've seen this graffiti on my travels. I've seen it in Italy. I've seen it in Spain. I saw it when I was in Argentina. I saw it when I was in Mexico. I saw it in South Korea, when I was in South Korea. I saw it in Thailand. I mean, I've seen this graffiti quite a bit. I've seen it in Asia. I've seen it in Latin America. I've seen it in Europe. Yankee go home. It's like a graffiti that you see sometimes. And that basically, I have to say, stems from the Spanish-American War, because that was when we first became a global influencer of the world, an imperialist power. And this is also something that's not up for a debate. If you are controlling other countries, you are by definition imperialist. Now, whether we're a good empire or a bad empire, that's the question. I personally think we're a good empire. You know, we have our flaws. We definitely have our flaws and our problems. But on the whole, my personal belief is that the USA is a force of good in the world more than it is a source of bad. But a lot of people might disagree with me, both in this country and in other parts of the world. Okay, so that's the whole purpose of this war. This is why you learn the Spanish-American War. We're going to move on to another point in United States history next. Okay, so I hope that this was useful to you and that you learned something about the USA by studying the Spanish-American War.